Chapter 19 of Hunting for Hidden Gold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Lone Tree. Suddenly, Frank Hardy had an inspiration. In the shelter of some rocks, he cleared away the snow, then began to search about for wood in order to build a fire. If he were lost, the best plan was to build a fire which would serve the double purpose of keeping him warm and possibly guiding Joe toward him as well. He found some small shrubs and stunted trees and managed to break off enough branches to serve as the basis of a fair-sized blaze. He had matches in a waterproof box in his pocket, and after several unsuccessful attempts, he finally managed to get a fire going. The wood was damp, but the small twigs caught the blaze, and within a few minutes the flames were leaping higher and higher and casting warmth and radiance. Frank crouched beneath the rocks and warmed himself by the fire. Once in a while he got up and went away to search for more wood to cast on the blaze. Occasionally he peered through the screen of snow in the hope of seeing some sign of Joe. At intervals he shouted until he was hoarse in the hope of attracting his brother's attention. The flames leaped up in the wind, and as he piled more wood on the blaze, the fire grew brighter. It was in a sheltered spot where the gusts of snow could not quench the flames. At last he thought he heard a faint shout. Frank sprang to his feet. He gazed through the shifting veil of snow that swirled about his shelter, but he could see nothing. Then he called out, "Joe!" The fire roared, the wind shrieked, snow slashed against the rocks above him. Then, out of the inferno of wind and snow, he heard the shout again, and a moment later he caught sight of a dim figure plunging toward him. He ran forward. It was Joe. He was almost exhausted, and he was blue with cold. He staggered over toward the blaze and collapsed in a heap beside the fire. "Thank goodness I saw the flames," he gasped. "I was almost all in. I couldn't have gone another step. I thought I'd never find you. I hunted all over. I got lost. I couldn't find the trail. We're both lost now. I got off the trail myself when I was looking for you. I don't much care where we are as long as we're together again and we have a fire." Joe extended his trembling hands to the blaze. In a short while he ceased shivering, and as the warmth pervaded his chilled body, his spirits rose. "That fire was a lucky thought," remarked Frank. "I was cold, and it just occurred to me that you might see a fire through the storm, even if you couldn't see me. I just caught a faint glimpse of it, just like a little pink patch shining through the snow. I was just about to give up and lie down on the rocks when I saw it. You'd have died of exposure." For a while the two lads were silent as they thought of how narrowly the blizzard had been cheated of its victim. Then, when Joe had become warmed by the fire, they began to consider their course of action. Frank looked out at the storm. "The wind seems to be dying down a bit," he said. "I can see farther down the mountain now than I could a while ago. Think we ought to start home? Do you feel well enough now?" Joe got to his feet. "Sure, I feel fine now. There's no use staying up here until nightfall. This storm may last a couple of days." "All right, let's go." They stamped out the fire and resumed their journey down the mountain. They stayed close together this time, taking no chances on again being separated. As Frank had noticed, the wind had indeed lost much of its fury, although it still howled and blustered on the mountain slope, and the snow still fell steadily in a drifting cloud. The trail was almost obscured by the snowdrifts, but Frank was able to find and follow it, and they finally reached the place where they had turned off toward the abandoned mine workings several days before. Here they hesitated. "What do you think?" Frank asked. "Now we're so close to the mine, I think we may as well go on with our search. I was hoping you'd say that. It shouldn't take us more than an hour or so, and it isn't dark yet. Besides, we have our flashlights. I haven't mine, but one's enough. Go ahead. It shouldn't be hard to find the lone tree from here." Frank turned off the trail. He headed directly toward the old mine workings they had previously visited and from which he remembered having seen the lone pine tree. The snow was deeper than they had expected, and they plowed through drifts up to the waist. They went on, however, and in a short while reached the abandoned mine of their harrowing experience underground. Here they paused. The lone tree was over to the right, I think, said Joe. They peered through the storm. They could see nothing but drifting snow and the dull masses of the rocks. A shift in the wind raised the curtain of storm for a moment, and then, like a gloomy sentinel, they saw the tall pine tree, solitary against the bleak background of gray. "That's it!" Now that their goal was definitely in sight, they felt invigorated, and they hastened on through the snow toward the tree with new vitality. Forgotten for the moment was their weariness and exhaustion, the cold and the snow, in the lure of the gold that they felt sure lay somewhere in the neighborhood of that lonely tree. Stumbling and plunging through the snow, they reached their goal at last. The tree creaked and swayed in the wind, and as they stood beneath it, they saw that they were standing on the verge of a deep pit that seemed to have been scooped out of the earth by giant hands. There were a few ramshackle ruins of old mine buildings nearby. The roofs had long since fallen in, and the buildings sagged drunkenly. At the far side of the bottom of the pit, clearly discernible against the snow, they saw the wide mouth of a cave. "That must be the shaft opening," said Frank. "We're on the track now." The boys descended into the pit. The going was precarious, for the rocks were slippery, and the snow concealed crevices and holes, so that they were obliged to proceed cautiously. But at length they reached the bottom and made their way across to the mouth of the cave. Frank produced his flashlight as he prepared to enter. "Stick close behind," he advised his brother. "We don't know what we're liable to run into here." The snow flung itself upon them, and the wind shrieked with renewed fury as they left the unsheltered pit and entered the half-darkness of the cave mouth. It was as though they were entering a new world. They had become so accustomed to the roaring of the gale and the sweep of the storm that the interior of the passage seemed strangely peaceful and still. The flashlight sliced a brilliant gleam of light from the blackness ahead. Step by step they advanced across the hard rock. The dampness and cold became more pronounced. As they went on, the passage widened, and in a few minutes they found themselves in a huge chamber in the earth, a chamber that extended far on into darkness, and they could not see the opposite walls. A curious rustling sound attracted their attention as soon as they entered the place, and Frank stood still. What was that? They remained motionless and silent. Away off in the darkness of this subterranean chamber, they could hear a scuffling and rustling, and sounds that the boys judged were caused by pattering feet. Frank directed the beam of the flashlight toward them, but the light fell short, and they could see nothing. They advanced several paces. The rustling sounds became multiplied. Then suddenly Frank caught sight of two gleaming pinpoints of light glowing from the darkness. "What's that light?" asked Joe. "I don't know. I'm going closer." Frank stepped forward again. As he did so, instead of two pinpoints of light, he saw two more. Then two more, until at least a dozen of those strange glowing green spots shone from the darkness, reflected in the glow from the flashlight. "Animals," he said quietly to Joe. At the same instant he heard a low, menacing snarl. The glowing greenish lights began to move rapidly to and fro. Into the radiance of the flashlight shot a lean, gray form that disappeared as swiftly as it came. A prolonged and wicked snarling rose from the gloom. Frank glanced to one side and saw that two of the greenish lights had moved until they were circling behind him. He leaped back. "We'd better get out of here," he said. "Those are wolves." But when the boys turned to retrace their steps, they were confronted by a lean form that barred their way to the cave entrance, and in the glow of the flashlight they saw two greenish eyes that glowed fiendishly, and two rows of sharp white teeth bared in defiance. End of chapter 19.